All right. Well, good morning, everyone. It is good to see you guys. This might be one of the briefest messages I've ever done. I've been battling a cold the last couple days, and so I might get a little squeaky on you, but just bear with me. #struggles. All right. We've been in this series for the last couple weeks. If you're new here, my name is Jim. I'm the lead pastor. I want to welcome those that are joining us online as well. We've just looking at the impact of social media, the pros to it, the ability to be able to communicate and connect with people really all around the world. I've got cousins cousin lives in the Netherlands and able to communicate and connect with her, and just it's amazing what we can do with this technology that we have. We also looked at the last couple weeks just how it affects us more than we realize, and it really has an impact on our relationships. And today, a topic I want to look at is #compassion. Now, let's do a little survey here. Let me ask you a question. So when you go on social media, how many use social media? I know not everybody does. How many use social media? How many just browse on social media? How many of you post on social media? All right, that's good. So when you go on social media, when you're done, and you've been on there for a bit, scrolling through things, do you walk away feeling more empathetic towards people, or would you say more irritated towards people? Yes. Wait, how many of you say empathetic? Feel more empathetic towards people? How many of you say more irritated towards people? Wow. Now that's interesting. Let me see young people right here. Empathetic? Anybody empathetic? Kind of? Irritated? And it's mostly those that are sitting next to you, right? All right, just kidding. All right. So it's kind of interesting on how this affects us because we don't even realize the effect that social media has. I'm going to slide up here so I'm in front of this mic. But it really, social media has the ability to just make us aware of so many things, so many needs, so many causes. Some of you remember just not too many years back, the whole, we took the ice bucket challenge, right? And one person starts this, just trying to promote, and just this cause of ALS. And then instantly, all around the globe, people are posting videos of dumping ice, water on themselves, the whole ice bucket challenge. And so there's this pro with social media that it gives us this ability to just connect, and you have GoFundMe accounts to help care for people, needs that are going on, whether it's in the church or outside the church. There's all these pros that come with it, yet there's also the challenges that come with it as well. So we're going to be looking at today. Now I want to start off by just reading a passage of Scripture, but I'm going to read it in a modern way, and then we'll actually look at the real text. So don't click on the next slide, Logan. I'm going to read it and just kind of, if we were to kind of put it in modern day, if Jesus was here today with social media, what it might look like. Okay, so I'm just going to read this to you, and then we'll get the real passage up on the screens. This is from Matthew chapter 9. Some of you may be familiar with it. And it says this, this is how I put it. Jesus grabbed his smartphone and scrolled through several social media platforms and commented, liked, and shared the good news of the kingdom. Right? I see some of you guys doing that, right? When he saw the crowd's negative, critical, and polarizing comments people made on his posts, he realized just how ridiculous people can be. Moved with frustration, he unfriended, blocked, and threw his smartphone into the Sea of Galilee. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest of social media is plentiful, but the wordsmiths are few." Ask the Lord of the harvest to send out more wordsmiths into the harvest field. So I know I'm just kind of being silly here, but the reality is that when you're on social media, you will see there's all kinds of challenges going on in people's lives. And it's so easy just to scroll and keep scrolling. And without social media, back in Jesus' day, there was all kinds of chaos, all kinds of needs around him. And sometimes when we walk into a place that's crowded, like social media is, it's easy to walk away not having empathy or compassion, but really being irritated with other people. And there's all kinds of research. We're going to go through this morning. So let's really look at the real passage from Matthew 9, starting in verse 35. It says this, when Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. Verse 36. So Jesus is going around. He's got doing this ministry, going around town to town. And it says he sees the crowds. Now the crowds, when you read through the gospel accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just mess after mess. stress after stress, right? When Jesus saw the crowds, he had what? He had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a cell phone. Right? He saw that they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd, that they were struggling with all kinds of issues and needs and concerns, right? Then he turns to his disciples and he said to his disciples, he says, guys, the harvest is plentiful, right? And you can go on social media and you can see the harvest is plentiful. So many needs, so many challenges that people are dealing with. And so he challenges, look, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Those that are actually engaged in doing the work and the ministry of the kingdom. And so verse 38 says, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. And so Jesus is like, guys, I want you to pray. I want you to pray like never before. Because as you've seen, as we've gone from town to town, village to village, teaching in the synagogue, healing the sick, casting out demons, doing all the things that Jesus did, he saw that there was just constant needs and brokenness and hurting people all around them. And sometimes when we walk into the crowds and, the virtual crowds even, it's easy just to get irritated. People just get in our way all the time, right? I mean, it's always this joke, life would be great if it weren't for people. Right? But we're them, right? We're the people, right? And sometimes we're the ones in the way. And it's easy to not have empathy. It's easy to not have compassion. Now, what's interesting is, as you do studies, there's been research done on the whole effect of this. And about 7 years ago, when some of the early studies were done on the effect of social media, how many of you would say that the outcome of it was sympathy, empathy, compassion went up? How many would think it went up? How many of you think it went down? It went down. People's ability to be compassionate and have empathy towards others decreased. And we wonder why we have all the challenges that we do in our culture. We've talked about this the last couple weeks, right? Last week I shared with you that like 530 billion selfies are taken every day around the world, right? We are a self-focused culture. Now, what's interesting is that there was this downward, descent of empathy. But then in this younger generation, what we're seeing, and this is where you start seeing a lot of tensions, anybody that's been on social media for a little bit, where a lot of the younger generation, there is actually a rise now in empathy. That where all these polarizing issues are taking place in our culture today, especially surrounded with all the political climate that we've been through, right, over the last year and this year, and all the challenges are coming with that. I'm not talking politics, but I'm saying it just creates all kinds of issues and challenges, and younger people are more empathetic towards some of the challenges than my generation and up. And there's this concern. They see people that are broken and hurting. And I'm not saying that one thing is right or wrong. I'm not trying to get any agendas, but I'm just saying when it comes to having empathy and compassion, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them. And so you see more and more younger people, and then people in my generation, even a little bit before me and up, they're like, how dare they? They're just immature, right? They don't understand. And it's like all of a sudden we get on social media, and rather than being empathetic and compassionate, all of a sudden these things are affecting the way we view the world, the way we view the very people sitting next to us when we come to worship together, right? And so we got to be mindful of these things because God calls us to be compassionate. When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion. So I was going to look at here today, and we're going to have some solutions to this, is how technology and social media hinders compassion, the negative effect that it has on us that sometimes we don't even realize. Now, it's a positive thing. I'm thankful for it, right? I've encouraged you guys to use the YouVersion Bible app, right? That's part of social media, and you can get on there and you connect with other people. Some people in our church, they do devotionals, morning devotionals, weekly devotionals, monthly devotionals, yearly devotionals together, right? And people comment, right? Oh man, that was really good, right? And you can highlight, and people comment on your highlight, right? So there's some really good stuff that comes there. We can promote the ministries, things that are going on there. There's really positives, but there's also challenges that come with us. And so one of the first things I want us to kind of understand is that number one is it causes us to be obsessed with ourselves. Now, we touched on this a little bit over the last couple weeks, but more than we even realize, that it causes us to be obsessed with ourselves. As I mentioned, 530 billion selfies are taken every day. We live in a selfie-centered world, right? As I shared with you the last couple weeks, back in the day when you just had a camera with a roll of film in it, film wasn't cheap, and nobody usually held because you couldn't see what you were shooting, right? You didn't hold the camera out in front of you and take a picture of yourself, right? We didn't do that. All right, we talked about last week how just the challenges communication. We had a phone, it was hanging on a wall. Right? It was the only phone that was in the house. When you'd answer the phone, there was no caller ID, no screening. You didn't know who was calling. You had to answer it. You had to have conversation. Now we can screen. Oh my gosh, it's the pastor calling. Straight to voicemail, right? I mean, it's like there's all these things that have really impacted us, and so we've got to learn to grow. So what I was going to look at is just how we've just become so self-obsessed that a study's been done on this, which is so interesting that they actually do studies on this stuff, that now there's categories for selfies. Yeah, there's categories for selfies. Matter of fact, we've got a couple here. We're gonna look at it. We just give a picture. There's one right there. So this category for selfie, it's like, man, this is what I look like when I woke up this morning, right? Why would anybody want to take pictures of that and post it? I don't know. I just had to do that just for this morning, right? Look, my hair's a mess, right? And then there's the BFF selfie, right? Look, there's me and my BFF, right? Yeah, we're out. Man, I wish I could be there right now. Anyway, it's like, hey, I got to show the world. I got to, this is my spouse, my BFF, right, forever. And then there's those that just love showing us glamour pictures. Look at that. Just pray for that guy, man. That's for his real estate, right? So like, hey, glamour shot. We were joking about this week. Dude, we didn't get the beach legs one in there. I was going to have a beach legs when he showed it to us Wednesday. But there's the beach leg selfie, right? How many of you seen those, right? Somebody wanting us to, hey, I'm at the beach, right? Then there's the duck face selfie. Oh, man, that one got flipped upside down. Oh, that's all right. Sorry, Samantha. I didn't put it in there. Blame Tyler. Anyway, the duck face selfie. I mean, what is that? I mean, it's just interesting. But somebody does it one time, and then everybody starts doing it, right? It's like the Tide Pods, right? It's like, what on earth? One person does it, and every kid's got to do it, right? So there's the duck face, and then there's the brag selfie, right? Now, you can see Brent's face there in the background. So there's kind of a little story behind this. I love Brent. He invited me to go to a Reds game, and a couple people couldn't go. So it's like, hey, my dad found us a free place to park in Cincinnati. I grew up in Cincinnati. And so it's like, hey, just invite your dad to come. So my dad came. So I got to be a smart aleck and brag a little bit. So I took this picture and I sent it to my brother. And I said, hey, look where I'm at. Did Dad not invite you to the game? He invited me. That's why we're here. He's like, yeah, right. He likes me better. I'm the oldest son. So anyway, it's like there's the brag selfie, right? We got to take pictures, of ourselves and brag. Then there's the mirror or in the gym selfie, Now, Paul never does this, but he did it just for me, right? It's like, look at my muscles, right? How many of you have ever been to the gym and you see somebody just walking around constantly with their phone, taking pictures of themselves? Like, we are obsessed with ourselves. Look at that, dude. And it's like, do you ever work out? I mean, if you just could put that thing down and worked out a little bit, you might look a little better, right? And then there's, the whole me with my pet selfie, right? It's another category. Aww. When I first met Tyler and when they had an apartment, when they were first, here in Greenwood, I didn't even know they had a dog, And then it's like, he said something about his dog. I said, what, you got a dog? So anyway, there's Tyler and his dog. You see people posting pictures of their animals all the time. Well, then with the modernization of technology and AI, right? Now we've got the AI selfies that are out, right? So this is Laurel. She did this, and I know her mom's here. She freaked out. She goes, when did you go and get that picture taken? She never did go, it's AI, right? And I've seen some of you guys do that. There's an AI selfie, makes us look better. Now here's a bizarre one that her son Logan took, this next one here. And this one here is how many days till you die selfie.
Oh, no.
Isn't that bizarre? Somebody comes up with this, so you can just kind of put dates and numbers. It's weird. But let me just give you a couple more. We don't have pictures for it. One of them is the convict selfie. Look, I did something illegal. There's the fish gape, right? The fish lips. There's the kissy face or kiss somewhere cool. There's the car. I got to take one with my car. There's the restaurant or food selfie. Hey, look what I'm eating. Who cares, right? But we got to show it, right? There's a new outfit, the new haircut, and there's just so many categories. I can go online and just like list categories of selfies, and there's like this list that just goes on. It's like, man, who does this? Right? It's like back in the day when you'd have to have encyclopedias to find stuff. It's like selfie, 10 pages, categories of selfies. So why am I saying that? It's just because we are obsessed with ourselves because of the technology that we have. And we're constantly taking pictures so we can show the world. And that's the thing. It's like, how many had to keep updating your phones because it didn't hold enough memory? Right? And when you first got them, it's like, oh man, it's like 2 gigs. It's like, that's great, Now it's like we got to have, 2 terabytes, right? Just to hold all of our pictures. Now, the challenging thing is that studies say that 80% of social media relates to us. To us. It's about us, right? And as I mentioned last week, that we're living for likes, yet we're longing for love. And the interesting thing about social media, and I'm going to come back to this here in a minute, is that when we go on social media and we're taking selfies and we're posting things, we're looking forward to people's comments on it, it becomes an actual drug addiction. It releases dopamine in your brain, and it just constantly keeps you engaged to where you got to keep going back and going back and going back, right? And we just live off this high, this self-induced high of dopamine, and our body rewards us for focusing on ourselves. Now that's crazy, isn't it? Now, here's why I want to challenge us in this. Because social media is great, but it trains us unknowingly to be self-centered and to be obsessed with ourselves. When Jesus comes on the scene, Jesus teaches us something completely opposite. Let's look at a passage here, Luke 9, verse 23. Jesus, he's teaching in the crowds. He said to them all, whoever wants to be my disciple, it's a student, a follower of Jesus, whoever wants to be my disciple must what? Deny themselves, take up their cross daily, and follow me. Now, we just took the Lord's Supper together as a body. And the whole essence of the Lord's Supper is it's a sacrifice. It's remembering what Jesus did for us. Jesus could have easily came on the scene and said, guys, it's all about me. I'm the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. You will worship me. You will serve me. You will do all these things. That's not what Jesus did, even though he could have, right? He died to self. He humbled himself. We talked about this last couple weeks. He when he was in the upper room, he took his outer robe off and wrapped a towel around him and just sat down and started washing his disciples' feet. And they're freaking out because, no, this is the example I'm calling you to follow. If you want to follow me, you want to be my disciple, you have to be the servant of all. And deny yourself. Not promote yourself, deny yourself. Take up your cross. Make sacrifices daily for the sake of the kingdom, and then follow me. So Jesus calls us not to live for ourselves. Pastor Rick Warren, years back, Pastor Saddleback Church wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Life. How many have read The Purpose-Driven Life? Great book. Every Christian should read The Purpose-Driven Life book, right? First phrase in the book was, this life is not about you. It's like, whoa. Because culture tells us that this life is about me. But it says this life is not about you. It's about living for the person of Christ. It's about knowing God and living for him, surrendering our whole life to him. So the first hindrance of social media that we have to be aware of is it just causes us to be obsessed with ourselves. The second challenge we don't realize is that increased exposure to others' hardships and suffering has desensitized us. When it comes to this thing of compassion, it is desensitized to us. There's actually a term for it. Psychologists call it compassion fatigue. We're so bombarded with so many causes, so many issues, so many challenges that we just have compassion fatigue. Now, it's interesting because it was talking about how that we just kind of, when we grab our smartphones or our devices, we just kind of have this tendency just to scroll, right? And we see all these things, right? And back in the day when it was just commercial TV, we didn't have some of the technology, we were just watching commercial TVs of all the streaming where you can just, skip all those commercials and stuff for the most part, right? That these commercials would come on and there'd be, some kid with a hair lip, right? In another country, in India or somewhere, or there was the dogs, these dogs need a home, right? And they got this really music playing just to kind of move you, and they have to have these somber voices, and they're just trying to pull at your heartstrings, right? And it's like, but because we had a remote, right? It's so easy to what? Change the channel, right? Now, with social media, it's like we got this constant thing. And one of the things they call, one of the technical terms they have is what's called a dopamine loop, right? Because we just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And social media is designed to keep us scrolling. And then what posters try to do is they try to get you to stop on theirs, right? So then they can get more likes, they can get more hits, they can make more money, right? So there's this dopamine loop. But then because of this overexposure to negativity that we're constantly scrolling, our brain cannot differentiate between what is important and what is not. It just sees it as all the same because we're training our brain just to keep scrolling. And so when we see, it's like we were, kind of laughing a little bit about that opening video, right? It's like, man, I just lost my job. And somebody posts that. And, but then, okay, we just keep scrolling, right? Oh, my dad just had a heart attack. Oh my gosh, we just keep scrolling to the next thing, right? And all of a sudden, it's like, like the video, it's like, well, man, it's a bad day because there's no dress that fits me, right? And our brain starts balancing this whole thing out that we start losing empathy towards needs that are around us. And there's a term for it. It's called doom scrolling. Isn't that crazy? You can look this up. If it's online, it's got to be true. I'm telling you. But there's a term for it. Psychologists, they call it doom scrolling. That we're so, it says here that the term describes the compulsive act of repeatedly scrolling through negative news, further contributing to desensitization and potential anxiety. So we just get caught up in doom scrolling. We just keep scrolling right on through. And none of those things over time cause us to be empathetic towards other people. Matter of fact, it tends to make us more irritated. The third challenge with social media is, we talked about this last week and the week before, is the lack of personal interaction makes it easier not to care, right? Because we have this online persona that many times is very different than what we really are in real life. And we can have, we talked about how, I think in the second week, how we're comparing our behind-the-scenes struggles with everybody else's highlight reel, right? And so we try to present this persona that everything's good, everything's all right, and because of this lack of personal interaction, it's easier not to care. I don't have to answer my phone, right? I can just send it to voicemail, or I can just hit a little custom button and write in my own little text, hey, I can't talk right now, and then you never call them back, right? And we just keep moving on. Now, in Jesus' day, where we see this kind of taking place was with the religious leaders, right? The Jewish leadership. They were bombarded and surrounded with all kinds of needs, all kinds of social challenges, hurting people, broken people, lepers, people that were demonized, all kinds of hurts, habits, hang-ups. And Jesus confronts them in Luke's gospel, Luke 11, verse 46. And Jesus replies to them because they were constantly avoiding personally interacting with the hurting and the broken and the needy. And Jesus replied, he said, you experts in the law, woe to you because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. And that's really kind of what social media does to us, right? Sometimes we want to engage and make some critical comment, challenge somebody's thinking, but we rarely ever take time to be present. I talked about that 2 weeks ago, be present and to be engaged in personal relating with other people, right? And so it's just so easy to do doom scrolling. Oh, I'm just going to scroll right on by. Oh, man, they lost their job. Oh, they have a health crisis. Or, the doctor told them this, right? We're just going to just keep right on scrolling right on by and looking at things that benefit us. And what God is after in our hearts is he wants to move our hearts to a much deeper place than what social media is training us to go to. You guys with me? So my challenge for us in this is we're going through this series, and when we're done with this series, we're not going to be talking about social media anymore, for the most part. We see in the scriptures that true compassion demands action. True compassion demands action. Let's just look at the Greek word here for compassion. Mike, could you read that for me? So compassion is this goofy word, right? Splagnizomai, right? So it's this hard word. I can't pronounce it very well. But what's interesting about this word for compassion is that in most Greek texts, this word doesn't exist. I've shared this a couple weeks ago with another word, that the evangelist actually had to create a word to help us understand the kind of compassion that God is after, right? And so compassion, we know, is like two words, right? It's with passion. So how many of you have seen the movie The Passion of the Christ? Right? And the aspect of passion has to do with suffering, right? It's not this passionate love, it's a suffering kind of love, right? And so it's with passion is the word compassion. And the way that, the early, mindset was, it was from deep within our bowels. We'd have this just move. We would just feel something very deep with sympathy, but it wasn't just having a feeling of sympathy. It was a sympathy that was so deep that moved us. It compelled us into action to do something about something, a scenario, something that was going on in somebody's life. And we see this over and over again in the Gospels, the way that Jesus was moved with compassion and moved into action. Let's look at some other passages here. Mark chapter 1, verse 40 and 41. Here's one of these examples. It says, a man with leprosy came and knelt in front of Jesus, begging to be healed. He says, if you're willing, you can heal me and make me clean, he said. Verse 41 says, move with compassion, right? Jesus reached out and touched him. He said, I am willing, he said, be healed. Now, the challenge here is when you read through the Gospels, you hear me saying this before, when it comes to leprosy, these people with leprosy, they had to go around, according to the law of the Old Testament, was they had to tell everybody, unclean, unclean, I'm unclean, don't come near me, right? Because it was this mindset, it was highly contagious. I'm unclean. They had to stay away until they were getting better. Then they had to go show themselves to the priest and declare them as clean. And this guy, he just comes and just throws himself at Jesus' feet. And I know the religious leaders, we see around the text here, they see this taking place and they're like, oh my gosh. If he was really a rabbi, a teacher, he wouldn't get near that guy. And this guy just throws himself in front of Jesus. If you are willing, you can heal me. And Jesus was so moved with compassion, he didn't even, not just move towards him, but he touched him. He touched him. That personal touch goes so far. It is so important that we are engaged. We're connected with other people. And it's so easy as us just to keep scrolling and never take time to pick up a phone and say, hey, I just saw your post. Can we get together? I'd just love to sit down and just pray for you. How can we help you? How can we come alongside? Right? But I think we just become so desensitized so easy. It's like, too bad for that person. Right? And Jesus challenges us. The kind of compassion that Jesus had was being present. It was engaged. It was being there in conversation and caring for a person. Matthew 14, we see another example of this. Jesus saw the huge crowds. He stepped from the boat. And it says he had compassion on them and he healed their sick. He didn't say, hey, thinking about you guys, but I'm on a mission here, right? No, he stopped. He had compassion. He prayed for the sick. He healed the sick. In Matthew 20, verse 34, it's another example of this word Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. People that were blind, right? And immediately received their sight and followed him. Every time Jesus was confronted with a need, he was moved with compassion and he was moved into action and he ministered to those that were around him. So I just want to kind of challenge us to go deeper, move beyond. The more I obsess with social media, the more I'm focused on myself. The more I get away from social media and I press into Jesus, the more I'm going to be moved with compassion to act on it like Jesus, right? The more time we spend with him, the more we're going to become like him. And I'm just going to be honest. I know that at times it is not easy. I mean, as a church and as a pastor of a church, I get emails that pop up all the time from local needs, local ministries. Hey, Pastor Jim, hey, we got this thing going on. We just love if your church would kind of help support us, and I get another organization. I'll get schools emailing me, and just, whether it's with, all kinds of fostering or other things. And it's like, man, it's so easy. It's like, man, I just don't have time for this, right? And it's not that we're going to be able to jump in on everything, but I think what happens is we're so bombarded with it, we don't have time for any of it, right? And we're missing out on what God's called us to and who God has called us to be. And I'm just as guilty. And it can be challenging sometimes. I mean, just last week, we were working on the flooring down here. Finally changed the flooring out on this end of the building, right? And while the guys were in there working on the floor, and I'm in the office, some guy pulls up, and he comes, and I go to the outside, and he says, hey, what's going on? It's like, well, I need gas. And, it's like, if I could just have, $15 for gas. It's like, I don't know, but I don't carry cash. We don't keep cash on hand, so I never have cash. We used to give out Walmart gift cards, but somebody told me Murphy's is no longer owned by Walmart, right? It's kind of a separate thing. So Walmart gift cards don't even work at the gas pumps anymore. When people come back with the Walmart cards, they don't work. It's like, I don't know what to tell you. Sell it. I don't know. And it could be so challenging. And so it's like, man, I don't have any cash. So it's like, but you know what? We got a gas can in the garage that we use for our snowblower. So I went back there and I grabbed the gas can. It's like, man, I got time for this, right? These workers are asking me questions. I need this, I need that. And it's like, okay, I can't plan this message, right? And not be moved. Right. So I take the gas can out and said, here, there's not a whole lot here, several gallons. Just take it and put it in your gas. He said, you sure? It's like, yeah, what do I owe you? Nothing. There's no strings attached. Just take it, right? And then Paul texts me and says, well, you need to go fill that gas can up. And then the next day, that snow hit, right? Thank God I went and filled that gas can up, right? But sometimes it gets messy because I had that gas can filled up. We needed it. It still got a lot of gas in it. Yesterday, we had a health seminar. Guy shows up wanting gas. And I said, well, give me a minute. I got to get ready to get this thing started. I'll go back in the back. I got a gas can. And by the time I came back, he left. Right. He didn't want gas, right? So sometimes it gets messy. But we don't stop being the church. We don't stop being like Jesus. We extend and act and put compassion into action. So I want to talk about just this last part of it. Just what does it look like when compassion is in action? Because that's where we really need to land. It's compassion in action. The first thing is this. When compassion moves into action, it interrupts, right? It's going to interrupt us. And there's so many times it's like, oh man, I don't have time for this. And it's sad to hear a pastor say, I don't have time for this. And I hear people saying, it's like, oh, I know you're so busy. I know you're so busy. I really don't want to bother you. I want you to bother me. Systems are not as important as people. You hear me? Systems are not as important as people. I care more about people than I do systems, than I do structures. Right? The church is not this building. The church is people, the followers of Christ, right? And so that's important. So I want to be interrupted, but it's easy sometimes. Man, I'm so busy. It's easy to get caught up and just want to keep scrolling, just keep kind of moving. I don't have time for this. So we see this example. Jesus was interrupted so many times, and this picks up where the 12 disciples, Jesus sent them out. They were out doing ministry. They come back, and they're exhausted. All right, so I'm not reading the whole passage here. We're picking up in verse 31 of Mark chapter 6. It says, and Jesus said, he says, come on, guys, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. Next week, we're going to talk about rest. All right, we all need rest. These guys, they were at it, for just a week. Just at doing ministry, sun up, sun down, right? They're just exhausted, been on their feet, traveling from town to town. He said, let's go find a quiet place and let's rest a while. And he said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. And I think, Jesus didn't want them to be hangry. So the Snicker commercials came from, right? You know what it's like when you're hungry and you're tired, right? It's like you get, my wife said, I can tell you don't feel good. You're not talking much. It's like, yeah. Anyway, it's hard to talk when you got all this congestion, right? So Jesus didn't want his disciples to be hangry, right? So it's like, let's find a place, get some food, rest. Verse 32. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. That's why I like fishing and just get away from everybody, right? But many people, verse 33, recognized them and saw them leaving, right? And the people from many towns, they ran ahead along the shore and got there ahead of them. This is why we love the crowds, right? It's like, look, we take a shortcut, right? And they're just trying to catch up with him, get ahead of him. Verse 34, Jesus, they come to the place, and he sees this huge crowd as he steps out of the boat. He's like, man, they're trying to get to a place to rest, get some downtime, right? This huge crowd's there. What did Jesus do? He said, come on, guys, give me a break. No. It says he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began to teach them. Now, right after this, as he's teaching them, the disciples like, all right, Jesus, you need to take a break. We got to send these people away. It's the middle of the day. They need to go back. They need to go to McDonald's or someplace to get some food, right? And it's a little journey away. We got to send them away. And Jesus says, no, you feed them. And they're like, with what? Right? It's right after this that Jesus takes, a little kid has some fish and some bread. And Jesus broke it and gave thanks and multiplied the loaves. And he just spent the rest of this day ministering to these people, feeding them, loving on them, and teaching them. He was interrupted. Just total change of plan. And some days it has to go like that. Right? God shows up in the interruptions many times. And if we're so busy, and if we're just constantly scrolling and not really stopping and engaging and seeing real needs, or constantly strolling, just going through the busyness of life, we will miss the opportunities that God wants us to be engaged in. Right? So it interrupts. We see this over and over again. There's another time where Jesus, I don't have it in notes here, where there was a little girl, this Roman centurion comes, says, Jesus, my daughter is dying. Can you come and pray for her? And she's like, absolutely. And he's on his way. And as he's on his way to go and pray, this woman who's had this hemorrhage of blood for 12 years just comes and throws herself, and reaches out and touches his garment, totally interrupts his journey. And he takes time. He says, your faith has healed you, my daughter. Go. And then the family comes and says, it's too late, Jesus. She died. And Jesus says, not too late. She's only sleeping. Right? And he goes and he raises her from the dead. Right? Jesus constantly was interrupted. Right? It was time he was teaching in a house and friends showed up, brought their friends. The roof's collapsing in. Right? Because they're just trying to find a way to get him to Jesus. And they totally interrupts his sermon. Please don't interrupt my sermons. I'm just kidding. Totally interrupts him, right? Because there was a need, right? So it interrupts, right? So it's important that we allow interruptions. Second thing, when compassion, when it moves into action, it costs us something, right? There's times where it's just going to cost us something. And a great example is the story of the Good Samaritan. We're pick up in verse 33, right? It says, then this despised Samaritan comes along, right? So there's this rabbi, this priest, this Levite who works in the temple. They've all passed this guy that was laying on the side of the road, and they just completely ignore him. They went around him because they didn't want to become interrupted, and they didn't want to become unclean according to the law, so they just passed right by. But then this despised Samaritan comes along. It says when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. And going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds. And this is Jesus telling this story as an example of the kind of compassion we need to have, right? Not to ignore needs that are around us, but to be engaged. Going over, the Samaritan smoothed his wounds with olive oil. Now, olive oil was not cheap. It was expensive. He's taking money out of his own pocket and the wine, and he bandaged them. And he put the man on his own donkey, so he's totally thrown off his schedule, took him to an inn where he took care of him. Verse 35, the next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins. That's 2 days' wages, right? 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man, and if his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. And what Jesus says, the kind of compassion he's after is to go above and beyond, right? If we're moved into action. We just don't scroll past needs, but maybe it's you see somebody that you know, and there's a real need and a real issue. Just pause, pick up the phone, call them, connect with them. Say, what's going on? How can we help you? How can we take care of you? Whatever it is, just take time to do that. Third thing, the last thing is this. When we take time and we engage in the kind of compassion that Jesus calls us to, it changes lives. It changes lives. And you cannot put a price tag on changed lives for eternity, right? It changes lives. There's another time where Jesus tells this story. This is in Matthew 25. He talks about this king, when the king comes back from his journey. He says, then the king will say to those on his right, he says, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. Right? You made it personal. You offered hospitality. Hey, why don't you come over? And let's give you something to eat. Let's pray. Let's minister to you. You gave me food. You gave me a drink. You invited me into your home. Verse 36, I was naked. You gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. And then, the religious, Jesus they're doing this interaction. I was like, well, when did we do that? And Jesus said after this, says, when you did it to the least of them, you did it to me. Right? So the kind of compassion that Jesus calls us to is it moves us from deep within. That we don't do doom scrolling, right? And we see people, a lot of times when people are posting things, even when they're negative, they're probably hurting, right? And it's okay to pick up a phone and have a conversation. Hey, what's going on? Can we pray together? Can I encourage you? We just get coffee, whatever. But I just want to challenge us as the body of Christ. Let's not let social media impact us. Let's be the ones to impact social media. Amen. Right? Yep. The world desperately needs us. Social media is not going away. It is not going away. So we're going to utilize it for the glory of God, and for his purposes in his kingdom. And when we see needs, let's be challenged to be moved with the kind of compassion that Jesus had and to minister to those around us. Amen.